I was 10 years old when my father parked his car at an empty YMCA lot. It had been 2 years of me knowing I had siblings, and despite our age difference ranging from as high as 12 to 15 years, I was excited. He would not give me much information about them or his other family in general. Ages and dynamics were elusive beyond me knowing when he hated someone, like his other wife for being ugly, inside and out, his youngest sister for being nosy and always calling out his misbehavior, his mother for being a whore throughout his childhood, and my eldest sister for being exactly like her mom. Yet in my mind, my siblings could be the part of my father he could give me without so much mess. Part of the magic of children is how wonderfully ethereal they are, unbeknownst to them. I was a wealth of virtues my father never had, or at least had lost, long before I came into his life. I was sweet and sparkingly smart. I had a good sense of humor that even adults enjoyed. I loved to dance, sing, and be friends with as many people as possible based on the simple desire to just have fun with them. His abuse killed these traits, and while I made Daddy recovery to recoup them, I could never regain them in the eyes of my siblings or even their children, because my father's villainous nature had painted me as the natural, evil he actually was. My father's sole goal throughout my life was to see if my mother, the love of his life, would give him another chance. And my mother's mistake was a false belief that if he truly loved her as much as he would scream to her he did, like a grown man, childishly weeping, that somehow that love would transfer automatically to the product of it. Yet my father fell madly in love with my mom and had me because she wanted me. And when she did not want him, he did not want me, nor did his other wife. What always enraged me about my father was how he played victim to his own choices, and calling him out made you his villain. There was a part of my father that truly wished he could leave me officially and not face off with the constant crushing of his hope that my mother would love him again. He would recount to me his felt betrayal and at my mother when confronted by his other wife, that he had to choose who he stayed with. My mother replied to her, "He is not staying with me." His other wife, whom he hated, was ready and willing to fight for him, but the wife that he truly loved was ready and willing to let him go. In his sick, twisted head, the fact that he was an illegal bigamist and secretly holding two families, of which he lied to each, had nothing to do with her choice. When you enter someone's life with lies, they have the right to assure you your exit from it once they learn the truth. Yet my father's relationship with truth was again out of convenience, like his other wives as well. I only met my siblings a handful of times, in part because their mother hated me, and they had no clue, which is why I knew they would never be able to love me. They got to see their parents because I got to see their parents' marriage. When I told my father that his other wife had been stalking me and my mom, he smiled, and he said, "She's just passing by." You may say that is a strange, maliciously banal answer, and why did I take it? My father exhausted me. He was so smart and strategic when it came to having sincere conversations that the truth became something you held and his choice not to, something you had to respect. Moreover, I think he enjoyed how crazy he drove that woman, something his nosy sister acknowledged. He calls her an ugly beast and is always talking about how wonderful your mother is and how she broke them apart, my aunt and my father's least favorite sister revealed. I believed her for two reasons. His wife had told me to shut up and pinched me the first time I met her, which my father denied like he did the stalking. Yet in my mind, if you really want to impress someone, especially as a version of peace, you are not messy towards them and act as if they could not even spell the word. Moreover, my aunt, as a victim of my father's own vulgar language towards women, knew too well how he spoke and what he was saying, especially because my father loved people fighting for him, which again, he could not forgive my mother for not doing. Hence, her stalking suddenly had a reason. He was telling her that he was having an affair with my mom, and she believed it and remained eternally fighting for a man that no one even wanted anymore. My father had hoped he would do the same in igniting averses between me and my sister. I did not even know I was in. It had been 5 years since I had spoken to my dad when my sister sent me a message that it was time I learned their side of the story. and how much my mother kept me away from them. Just on that line alone, I knew she did not understand that them was my siblings and nieces and nephews. Her parents loomed over my life, and I was kind enough to have compassion for her mother's creepiness, understanding my father loved turning women against women, or at least against themselves. He particularly loved that notion now that my oldest sister was even older, remarking when I was a child at how she was as vicious and as nasty as her mother, but that he appreciated the letters and cursing out she ignited in protection of him towards her aunts and his mother. Again, turning women against women. For my father, if he could manipulate her darkness as a way to feed his own, she was behaving, even though he felt as disgusted by her as he did mostly every female within his proximity. Yes, she did not have a clue how badly he treated me and my mother, especially since the first 15 years of my life, my mother was really sick. She was too physically and emotionally drained from various illnesses that made the toxicity of her parents feel too powerful to be palatable. Thus, she ignored it, and that sparked my now resentment towards her. When my sister's mother would leave voodoo trinkets by her home, my mother simply called her family that believed in Santeria in Puerto Rico and asked how to clean it. When I would see her eerily walking past our home to see if my father visited or left his usual love letters to my mother, which he did even after 6 years of me not talking to him, my mother would ignore it. When I would come back from a daddy-daughter date, where by age 4 my father declared psychological warfare against me, my mother did not ignore it, but tried to comfort me by making it small. He's just an idiot, Deandra. He's just an idiot. Yet hindsight is 2020. And so much compassion for my mother. And I have so much compassion for my mother and her flawed reactions when I realized the amount of illnesses she was battling, even all at once, while two people tortured us just to still act like they loved each other in front of the people they wanted to love them. We became a physical garbage can for their emotional murkiness and malice. And unfortunately for me, my only teammate was literally a wounded warrior. So I don't know if any of my audience members have had sick family members or grew up with a sick parent. My mother was sick pretty much all my life. Like, I can't really recall a version of my mom that was truly healthy. She's just, we all know that one person that they always have like a lot of illnesses, or they're always going through some type of health crisis, but they get through, and we're so used to them getting through, and we're so used to them looking and acting okay while being unhealthy that we almost question if they're unhealthy. And growing up, I have so many resentments against my dad. And one of them is that I really do think he manipulated my mother's lack of health and kind of bombarded and overwhelmed her emotionally so that she never at least demanded him to materially respond and rise up for me. I would tell her, there were very few instances when I met my dad and I didn't return to her absolutely crying. And I've already discussed my belief as to why my mother kind of kept my father in our life despite his abuse. And I didn't realize just how exhausted my mom was until I started daddy recovery and like looking back at all the times she was working, especially overtime, to support me and support my grandmother financially. And she was sick. She was literally sick. And it was almost as if she had to use every ounce of her body for that 9 to 5, sometimes 9 to 8, and then came back and crashed. And it sucked because I played by myself. I hung out with me. And sometimes I think my mother and my parents were very lucky I was such a naturally good kid, because I had every excuse to just become a rebel without a cause and kind of go crazy. But I was never, rotten. I did my homework. I did theater. I was a nerd to the max. And I just really liked, writing poems and watching TV. I'm pretty basic. It's still my favorite thing to do. And that was the thing that annoyed me with my dad. Not only the fact that he was psychologically abusive and financially abusive to this woman who was physically ill, and understood that she just didn't have the energy to combat him, because that's what he would do. And that's a point that I made when I confronted him about the stalking and the weirdness of his wife and her little voodoo things, and even his weirdness. He just was, my father's a Mensa member. Like, he's incredibly intelligent. He knows how to build a verbal strategy that is either super rambling or selectively silent, or he's just brilliant. Brilliant to the point that you even forget why you brought up the topic. And when you do that to a child, that's a really great strategy to have on a child that has not even fully developed their brain. Because sometimes I'd be like, oh, yeah, I get. Sometimes he even manipulated me to apologize. I was like, I would tell him, I don't like it when you call me stupid. And then by the end of it, I was apologizing for asking for an apology. Like, he's just really good. Don't underestimate a good liar, especially when they are the first person they have convinced. And my father definitely lives up to that MO. And I think what upset me with my dad was how unnecessarily heavy he was. But I realized in perspective, he was a heavy human being because he wasn't light. He was malicious. He was evil. He was a liar. He loved to scheme. He loved to plot. He enjoyed the rush of getting away with things. And we often paint a complicated person as somebody with depth, but I have depth and I'm simple. Just tell the truth, live in your truth, love yourself, love others. Complicated for me is someone like him that just made everything so weighty. And I really thought, and I start about, the parking lot at the YMCA, and kind of, I remember that day so specifically. It was pouring. And my father parked, and I had known about my siblings for at least 2 years. My mother told me, and I think I brought it up in this episode. My mother, I'm going to bring it up in a future episode. That's why I write sometimes the episodes together. And I just was begging my dad to please let me meet them. And he said, they don't want to meet you. They're not ready. My other wife, hates you. She's really mean. She's super racist against Latinos. She doesn't like he named everything on the list that was possible as to why, he didn't want me to meet my other siblings. And what's so funny is I think part of why my father hated me and hated his youngest sister is that we are persistent. Like, we're going to get you to admit the truth. And even if we don't get you to admit the truth, we already know it. So it doesn't matter that you're still lying. And I think he hated the fact that he couldn't hide with us. He was very, very apparent. And then he finally admitted, I don't want you to meet them. I'm not ready. And I said, well, it doesn't matter. It's about me. And he smiled, and it would be another 2 years till I met them, because I met them, I think I was like 12, 13. And I felt like he was very smart, but stupid, in the sense of he understood that if my siblings, like most people, if you have to choose between having a sister and having a father, you're going to choose having a father. Most of us, our friends become our siblings, our cousins. We hear so many people who don't have the experience of a brother or sister, and they kind of make it up. But you can't have the experience of a father or mother. That's only one. And he knew that. And he made them, in a way, decide without them even knowing. And I think he did that because my father was abusive towards me and my mom, but he didn't live with us. He visited, and he lived with them. And he saw the ashes of his abuse, because my aunt had told me he was, at least in the very beginning of their childhoods, which I imagine, it was peak bigamy, peak addiction. He was very bad to them. And he had mentioned that to me. And, sometimes he said the truth, especially when it was convenient, and helped him evade a responsibility. And I think he approached his sobriety and his kind of misconception of what redemption is, as I'm just going to give them all the money and give them all my networks and give them all the best of me, because I saw how horrible I was to them. And I think with us, he just kind of threw bombs at us and walked away and never saw the fire. It's kind of like, somebody committing a crime and they never stay for when the detectives get there. So they convince themselves in an odd way that they'd never committed it. It's kind of like, if I don't see the investigation afterwards, then it means there was nothing to investigate to begin with. Like, he was just a really, really, really slick, very slick, very, very slick. And when my sister sent me that letter of, it's time for you to know what your mother did to block us, I just thought, God, why did he lie to them? Why did he wasn't good to us. My mother was sick. I didn't see these people enough to be so villainized. You don't know me. And I gave my sister the grace when he would talk about her. And say, she's as vicious as his mom. She's as nasty as his mom. And my father was very racist. Like, he chose words. They're aggressive. And my sister one time left a letter to my aunt, and I mentioned it, saying that she basically describing my mom the same way my father described hers. Racist, mean, manipulative. And my father was just so intelligent, because my sister and his other wife are Black. And we are Latino. And he did this weird thing of, we're full-blooded. That's why they don't want us. And I'm like, what in the West Side Story, Harry Potter universe energy is this? Like, I remember being a kid and just feeling like I had to go through so much, and always wondering why there was just so much emotional and material batter just to be at peace, just to get something, just to meet them. It was so messy. And then I met his wife, and she told me to shut up, and she pinched me. And I think she thought I was too excited. We were at this reunion, and my father, it's funny because now that I say that, I do think my father was always saying that I'm very excited and I'm loud and I'm passionate and I don't know how to control all my emotions. And it's something that the few times I met his family, he was always shushing me. So maybe she thought, let me follow him, right? Like she followed him for all his life. But ultimately what I'm trying to get at is their mother wanted my dad. My mother didn't. My father wanted my mother. And just on that dynamic alone, I was doomed, because their parents were obsessed with image control, and they were obsessed in an odd way with showing us their darkness. And I think because throughout the years, they got so good at hiding how evil they were, especially towards us, that you can convince yourself you're good. Especially if the only time you're evil is when you're doing drive-bys to see if your husband is still, is with another woman. What? And leaving little voodoo trinkets. What? So yeah. God, what a complicated life. I hated that he made that choice. He made them choose. I hated that he painted me as a villain. And that's why the episode and the song is called, you don't have to make me the enemy. You could just say, I committed bigamy. I fell in love with another woman. I'm still in love with that woman, but I've decided to stay here. And I'm going to try to make this work. And I'm going to try to be good to everybody. And I'm not going to make women turn against women for no reason, because at the end of the day, it still doesn't satisfy me. It still doesn't make me happy. I'm just a miserable, hurt person waiting to end my own life. That's it. That's all he had to say. Check out daddyrecovery.com for more stories. Check out Deandra on all platforms for all my music, and check out Daddy Recovery as a podcast. It's really fun.